we also find that very often people struggle and they use words like customer experience, customer centricity, customer engagement, all of those interchangeably. And I think that is one of the reasons why very often businesses struggle to really get down to making customer experience really tangible. Do not underestimate at this stage, and we will touch on these sort of topics in the course of this webinar. What is the impact of COVID-19? What did it do to the mental states of not only the people who deliver propositions, but also to the market out there collectively? So there's a number of things that we hope that we will be able to lift the veil on and give you a good indication and some good insights in terms of customer experience and how it can be utilized in this time, very often that people refer to as the new normal. Prof. Bonang, over to you.
So I touched very briefly on how COVID-19 has changed everything. But I almost hinted to the fact that even the way ordinary citizenry expects service delivery from their government has now changed. But I think suffices to say that even the way we engage, interact, and interface as individuals has changed. At a personal level, we have changed the way we celebrate, the way we go to restaurants, the way we even do these small things that we call work. How then does it change this world of work? Apart from the fact that we don't see each other, we don't go to meetings, we don't sit in conference rooms, we don't drink bottled water, we are using webinars, we are on Skype, we are on Zoom, that we are on Microsoft Teams. I think if you are in real estate and you own buildings and you get your primary income from renting this out, it's not totally unexpected that probably half the people are not going to go back to their offices. We are now the longest country in the world in terms of lockdown. Yesterday, probably 120 days. In Wuhan, it was 76 days, almost 4 months. Maybe we like the way we are working. Maybe we don't ever want to be caught up in traffic anymore. Think for a moment, if you are a lady, when last did you put your own high-heeled shoes? If you are a gentleman, when did you last buy a tie? Do you still need a tie, for instance? So those are some of the things that, as we speak about how our customers' expectations have changed, we now talk about user experience. We talk about citizen satisfaction. We talk about how, as ordinary people, not just executives, not just employees, not just somebody's husband, a father, an uncle, or your aunt, niece and nephews, how do we define, how do we describe, how do we shape this new world? How do we ensure that we talk a new language that will still allow us to have this world of commerce, of industry, and we are still able to exchange goods and services? That's what we probably want to get deeper into. Ineke, let me hand over to you.
Thanks, Professor Bonang. You've opened up a myriad of doors to talk about. So one of the things that we do, we have a Consulta online research panel community, and it's a very long name for really an engagement, an ongoing engagement with about 350,000 people that opt into an online community, a research community. And we don't just give them surveys, we actually have an ongoing conversation with our community. So at the beginning of lockdown in April, we started having a conversation with people. We just really wanted to tap into what is busy happening, how are people experiencing the lockdown? And 4 themes came out of it. We spoke about how people perceive government's handling of the pandemic. Then we spoke about income continuation. We spoke about what happens with employment and what is going to happen in terms of the employment. What is your expectations? And then the last thing was really around testing whether people had the information on COVID. So I'm going to touch on 2 things that you touched on. At the beginning stage, people were understanding that this needed to happen, and it was very supportive of what government was doing and thinking it's the right decision. But as we went into those conversations, as consultants, we actually started to see the theme coming through that the longer that this goes on, the more people's coping mechanisms are going to be challenged. And certainly in the follow-up conversations, we started seeing that. So in the beginning, when we asked, are you able to continue to generate an income in a completely accelerated digital world? People almost went back to basics. If we can think about Maslow's hierarchy, it's absolutely back to basics: health, safety, security, and Wi-Fi. Make sure that I have Wi-Fi, make sure that I stay connected, that I can continue to generate an income. And there was a lot of uncertainty. Fast forward 8 weeks, we still have this conversation with our community, and it changes. Very interesting from, yes, I want to continue my income. It's extremely important. And I'm expecting my employer to help and connect me. But I'm struggling because as a human being, I need to connect to my loved ones. So over the course of 8 weeks, we started seeing the psyche of the consumer starting to change. And that's extremely important for companies in terms of customer experience, because of the needs, the wants, the thinking is changing. And we know that it's accelerated through technology and how we bring these solutions. I read around 4IR that there's V-commerce. So V-commerce is the voice commerce, and then it's what I read about headless commerce. Headless commerce is where you start having a divorce between your front, your UX, and your back-end systems, and that you are technology advanced. And there's also an AI whisperer. And I'm asking myself the question, if I look at what our community says, is my need, my want as a consumer has changed. Yes, we are in 4IR. Yes, we are in this technology race. And as companies, we are almost, I'm asking myself, are we running this race, the 17,000 meter race around technology, and we're getting into V-commerce and e-commerce and the next generation whisperers, but we still have consumers that are marginalized. We still have consumers that is excluded from financial services. Are we not running a race that we're kind of looping each other on the technology race, forgetting that as an employee, I'm also a human being, that I'm not just connected to work, but I'm also connected to my family. We're seeing those themes coming through in the research that we're doing, that I'm getting alone. I need to be connected. So aren't we running a 15,000 meter race where the consumer is running a 5,000 meter race? And that we have all of this potential in 4IR, this way we live, the way we work, the way we relate, long before COVID, and it was fast-paced innovation. From the research we do and the honest conversations that we have with consumers, their minds, their needs, their wants have changed. And that brings us back to CX. If we talk about the full Monty of Cx, as companies, we've got to really stand still and understand what is the race we're running in a myriad of the technologies. That takes a lot of investment. It takes resources out of the company. Where is the consumer? Where is the customer that I'm intending to serve in all of this? And not forgetting that they're human beings. That's not just technology driven. So now, Johan, you've also got a lot of things around the UX and CX, and I can see that you're burning to come in here. So I'm going to leave the headless commerce divorce, where we're divorcing the front and back end around the UX and CX and how we do customer journey mapping. I think I've set it nicely up for you to come in there, and we continue this conversation.
Thank you, Inigo, as always, setting things up for a good conversation. And I think the one area that both Prof. Bunang and yourself has touched on within the discussion on the fourth industrial revolution, and more specifically at the moment, just the mere fact that we're having, like Prof. Bunang has said in the intro, we doing these things now digitally, and in exactly the same way that we have seen over the past decade or so, many businesses jumping onto the bandwagon of CX. What is happening now is that businesses are not by choice jumping onto another bandwagon. They are actually forced to jump onto another bandwagon, and that's digitization. Now, quite interesting, I'm very often just in the past week, in many of the discussions, people have asked me, so the moment that we digitize and we now speak about devices through which we engage with our clients, the question is UX, so-called user experience, the new CX? And I think very often what we will see is that if we just think about what has happened in the world of customer experience, I very often bring in the concept of the so-called business triangle, that it says that if you really cut away all the detail, any business basically consists of three components. It's got the product, the service, the solution on the one anchor, and then it's got the people, and then it's got its systems and processes. And I think for a very long time, we have seen businesses trying to differentiate themselves by really focusing and creating differentiation on those three anchors. But as we know, it is in a typical industry, and let's use banking as an example, it's extremely difficult to differentiate with product. We've seen it on so many occasions. Is that a bank comes up with a new solution, a few weeks down the line, all the others have caught up with that bank. And the same pretty much almost can be said about the systems and the processes that enable the transactions that the banking industry is offering. So it really just leaves people as a type of differentiator. Now, where I want to go with this is that what has happened now is that and when I say we, have the businesses really did they give consideration to customer experience in their digitization journey? Or is it merely just, okay, we have a digital platform, we can now deliver? And that is really something that I think a question that every single business, and remember I said that most businesses have some reference to customer experience or customer centricity somewhere in their strategic objectives. But here's the test question, is to what degree have you put the customer at the center of your design of your digital platform, the engagement, all of those things that will enable the differentiation that the business is seeking to achieve or has sought to achieve. So, as you've rightfully said, the mindset, let's call it the total psyche of the customer out there has changed. There are so many examples. I'm going to mention just one for now, and we can maybe touch on one of the others a little bit later on. But what we do know is that every single human being, if you look at a cross-section of the human brain, you will find that the outer layer of the human brain, the so-called neocortex, is the one that is responsible for rational thinking. And directly underneath the neocortex, the so-called limbic system, keeping in mind this is an oversimplification, is the limbic system that controls our emotions. What we do know is that the moment that we experience stress, strain, all of those things, the brain has a tendency to scale down in function from the rational to the emotional. And I think one of the questions that we are asked and that we touched on very often when we speak about CX in the post-COVID era and even amidst the COVID era is to what degree have you as a business that you make provision for the psychological and more specifically the emotional components of your value proposition? It's no longer just a rational game. It is businesses who have succeeded to really connect with their clients on an emotional level, that's where we need to go. And I will definitely touch on that a little bit later on when we speak about the practicalities in terms of just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 principles of customer experience, and really provide our attendees to this webinar with some practical things that can be done by just focusing on those 4 principles of CX.
So in about 10 minutes, we'll be taking questions and comments from you as well, because we said it is going to be a conversation. So as we try and deal with our new needs and how these manifest in our journey in trying to continue to connect, and how do we cope under COVID-19? One of the things that has really become central is what then is the role of business. And before I touch on the role of business under COVID-19, it is evident that what COVID-19 has done is to really expose sometimes things that were already there, but we're choosing not to be very awake to, but also it has introduced new dynamics. One of the things that I'm absolutely passionate about is how COVID-19 has simply exposed the deep structural inequalities. Governments all over the world, 193 countries today, 3.5 billion people have all been affected by COVID-19. And the mantra is the same. There must be a little bit of social distancing, there must be self-quarantine and basic hygiene, wash your hands, maybe with soap for 20 seconds, at least. But think about it. If you live in Alexander, the most densely populated area, or in Soweto, where there's more than 2 million people, bigger than the population of Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Swaziland, how do you experience and practice social distancing when it's informal settlements? It's 1-bedroomed houses. If you're lucky, it's a 4-roomed house with 2 bedrooms. On average, 5 people living in that house. What social distancing are we talking about? When we say, but practice self-quarantine, and we're in Alexander, and it's a shack. And again, there's an average of 5 people, parents, and probably 3 kids. But as a company, you then say, but we want you to go and work from home because it's safer for you to be able to do so. And yet we know that Stats SA says only 10.4% of the population and households have direct access to the internet, which then leaves the majority of people with no access to the tools that we take for granted. In Sentin, they've got multiple devices. The wife could be on another device, the kids on another, but in Soweto, they probably have 1 cell phone. And not all those cell phones are smartphones. How then do we expect them to cope? So what then is the role of business under those environments? Let me just leave you with 6 things without any degree of granularity in the interest of time. So the first is, if you can survive and emerge the other side as a business and you are still alive, I think you are already profitable. Number 2, how do you bring about this notion of shared value? Because one of the things that are keeping us awake at night is how boards are seized with the fact that corporate decision-making cannot only be driven by what the shareholders want. Now they have to take into account the broader stakeholder community. Thirdly, how do you as a business make sure that you do no harm? That your employees have a right to come to work safe, but to leave your work environment safer to go to their significant others, that they are not infected, that you have not given them a positive status. But that sounds like a passive work, do no harm. I think it's the job of business to make sure that we make the world a better place, because we not so much inherited it from our forebears, as we borrowed it from our children. Therefore, it behooves us to leave it in a state that is substantially better than we found it in. In COVID-19, can it be better? Lastly, what skills in the fourth industrial revolution do we want? We look at government and say, give us coding, Internet of Things, cryptocurrency skills, or should we be developing them ourselves and thereby growing our own team? What is the role of education when it moves from bricks and mortar, where one lecturer used to stand in front of 100, maybe class? Now you do it by technology and you could reach 20,000 people. There are no borders. Geography doesn't matter anymore. And yet we know that's probably the most potent tool to take these students, these learners from Alexander and from Soweto in 20, 25 years, where they can also afford a house in the leafy suburbs of Bryanston. So when one steadily burns the midnight oil, one gains access to the domain of knowledge and wisdom, the world of meaning, the world that cannot be conquered without a persistent crusade. How do we ensure that there's digital equality as we think about some of those things? Ineka?
Bonang, you open up a lot of things. We only have half an hour. So, if we start talking about shared value creation, I'm going to keep you busy for a while. Because for me, that is where we need to go in terms of the shared value creation. And it really links, there's so many things I'm thinking about. So let me gather it to one thing. Shared value creation, if I can get my master's degree to finish that. If we take a tale of two cities, everybody knows a tale of two cities. So let's take business on the one hand and we take consumers on the other hand. And you touched on corporate decision-making and making sure that there's quality. So let's take a practical example where we missed it. I'm not picking on an industry. My focus is always looking at the facts, and let's learn from history. Like you said, let's not borrow from our children. We make sure that we give to them the best that we have. So the tale of two cities, we have business on the one hand, and if we look at the economic models and the business models, it's about gaining customers, retaining customers, and upselling. It's about making a profit. That's where we are. Yes, I agree with you. We need to go into the shared value creation, but at the moment we do answer to shareholders. So let's take a very practical example where we can learn from the research that we've done, how we can do this better. On the other hand, we had the consumers. Now, long before COVID, we knew that there was vulnerability, there's over-indebtedness. As South Africans, if we do research and you ask a South African around their budget, a couple of things are going to be certainties. The first time you ask them to add up all their expenses, it's going to be more than 100%. So budgeting and financial planning has not been our strong point. And we've already had quite pressure pre-COVID in terms of the vulnerability of our consumers. And as financial planners and as financial regulators and financial responsible entities in the industry, we've really tried the products, everything that Johan also mentioned earlier. So we have these two cities, the tale of the two cities on business, and then we have consumers. COVID happens. And as I said, we have this the ongoing conversation with our online community. And if I can summarize into 4 what customers told us: I need financial services to care about me, to be an integrated offering. I need efficacy, I need simplicity. And in there is also the access. So you very much touched on it, that the game has changed, Johan. You spoke about that earlier. And suddenly financial planning and risk, these things are suddenly coming to consumers. If we then look at how and what the reaction was from the totality of the financial services, and I'm not making them the scapegoat, I'm just trying to give a very practical example where consumers are giving a voice. They're saying, care about me, give me an integrated value proposition, make it simple. Think about that I was vulnerable before there was COVID. Then we see the strategies, and yes, there was relief, there was financial relief. We saw digital payments in the funeral insurance industry, and it was really fast-tracked. But then we also see, if you then take a macro view, is that there was a lot of effort on marketing, and it was blanket relief. And we offered this to consumers that was already under pressure. We had 9 million people under debt review and really pressured before COVID. So as business, we were navigating uncertainty that we had no script for. And then we made it complex and conditional. And we said, we will provide relief, provided that you were in good standing before COVID, provided that you had access, provided that you can have access under a leafy suburb, in a leafy suburb, and you have access to our renewed relief measures and our internet measures and our technology measures. And we relooked our benefits and we started excluding the very things that people needed, because as business, we've never navigated for this uncertainty. So when you start talking about it's about partnership going forward, it's absolutely about shared value creation. And it's going to ask of companies, it's going to ask of your bottom line, it's going to ask of how you approach corporate social investment. But a customer is a stakeholder. That total stakeholder map that you were speaking about, it's about listening to the voice of customer. And that's what we do every day. From the access and the tools that we have, care about me, give me an integrated solution, don't make it complex and convoluted, because as business, you are navigating uncertainty. I am a human being and I was pressured before COVID. Make sure that you understand that the game has changed and where are we meeting the customer in the right digital path, but in the right human path as well. So now, Johan, you also want to link to that. And I see that we have time. We want the audience to have time for questions. So 1:15, I'm just checking with my panelists. If we can maybe then move in the next 5 minutes and then open up for questions. How do you feel about that?
Perfect, Ineke, thank you. Yeah, there is definitely one or two components that I would like to react on, and I think for the sake of every single one who tuned into this webinar, maybe just to ask a few pertinent questions. And I always find it valuable if you ask these questions, and then maybe everyone who tuned in can then ask themselves about their own businesses, their own propositions, and so on, about the degree to which they have taken these things into consideration, given the changing landscape that we're operating on. So if we think about and speak about the impact of COVID-19, I think that the one thing that we can assume, the one area where there was definitely an impact, is specifically if we think about the concept of your value proposition. And have you revisited your value proposition? And I think the concept of a value proposition very often is misunderstood, and it is easy to basically just to reduce it to 3 questions. And that is literally, when you ask that question, what problems are you solving for your potential clients? The second one is, how do you improve their situation? And then the third one is, how do you deliver some benefit? Now, the question would simply then be, have you thought about the problems that you are solving in the new normal? Is it still possible for you to improve the client's situation? And there are so many things that one can link then to specifically principles within customer experience. One of the principles is that when people interact with any sort of brand, they have expressed needs, unexpressed needs. Take dining out as an example. Surely dining out is not about the meal. It's far more the actual experience, ambiance, social interaction, all of those things. And now all of a sudden, we don't have those elements anymore. So I think asking the question, have we really considered the impact of COVID-19, the changing landscape on our value proposition? And that's a very good starting point. The second one that I would just really like to mention, and I can conclude with that, is that we just found that the moment that you think of customer experiences as a journey, a development journey, we know that businesses go through various stages of development, and without going too much into the theory and so on, but it literally just starts with the introduction of customer experience strategy in your business, it will literally imply that you will find in your business that people are unconvinced, but they may be interested in the concept of becoming more customer-centric. And I think that most businesses have moved beyond that. Then you get into the level where we speak about getting involved in buy-in, and then formalized and converted, all the way to 6 levels that then end up with engage and sustained, otherwise known as the CC maturity journey that we focus on. Now, just keep in mind, what we do know is that one model that's very, very well known in group behavior says that any group goes through various stages of development. You've got your typical forming, norming, storming, performing, adjourning. And what we do know is that the moment that a group has formed and a group is in a performing stage, and there's all of the sudden changes in that environment where the group is operating, the group then inevitably go back to lower stages of group development. So typically, a new CEO is appointed in a business. The business as a whole will probably go back into storming and then again into norming up until the time that they again find themselves in performing. Now, exactly the same happens with your customer centricity maturity. Given COVID-19, what will happen is that you could even have a business that were operating on a level 4 of customer centricity. In other words, dedicated reinventing. It means that everyone in the business is focused on the customer. We're trying to explore, we innovate. And now all of a sudden, COVID-19 happened. And then what we need to do is we move now to digital platforms. The things that Prof. Bonang has mentioned, people are working from home. People are no longer have the luxury of quickly touching base, having a conversation around a topic at a coffee station in the office. And that forces the businesses down to a lower level of customer centricity maturity. And we need to ask ourselves, where are we now? What is it that we need to do to re-establish our previous levels of customer centricity maturity so that we can really then do things and do business the way that we have done it and the way that we've positioned ourselves as a customer-centric business. So I think that you can see there are actually so many things that one can speak about on this topic. I always tell people, I say that with this sort of story, there's a 3-minute version, there's a 3-hour version, and there is a 3-day version of the same story without taking any real stop. We can just keep on because it's alive, it's around us, and people and businesses always focused on the customer, knowing that it is the biggest asset that they have. But do we succeed in really turning our customers into an asset for the business?
Wow. Carol, do we have some questions, comments from our other colleagues who are participants on the webinar? I hand over to you.
We do, Professor, and the first one we're going to start is for you, and I think it's because you are the master communicator. And so it relates to a comment that Ineke made around the early stages of COVID. Government did a good job of getting buy-in. And the question is around business getting buy-in from their consumers through communication. And perhaps business is info sharing, but not communicating. So what can business do to communicate better to their clients? What are some of the tips that you would have?
Wow, I think that's absolutely correct. But context is everything. Remember that when we got into this COVID-19 as South Africa, we have never been at this place before. One, because we had just about emerged out of the 9 wasted years of state capture. Number 2, we had just gotten into a technical recession. Number 3, Moody's had just downgraded us to below investment grade, joining the other rating agencies, which made borrowing more expensive for governments, state-owned enterprises, but for you and I as ordinary consumers, for our bonds, mortgages, repayments on cars, and etc. And then COVID comes in and it finds us already lying down prostrate and almost finished. As if that's not enough, we then have telecom rolling blackouts on top of that, closing down these businesses. So whilst businesses have not done a good job in communicating, because remember, communication is not only verbal, I think they can be almost excused because they were operating under the most extreme circumstances. Secondly, they could have better prepared when President Madam Cyril Ramaphosa spoke to us on the 23rd of March and gave us 4 days to, we are getting into national lockdown. A lot of businesses did not use this time for self-reflection, to really reconnect with their customers and their employees to say, how do we use the 3 days just to make sure that we are better prepared so that we can still continue to provide services and products to our customers so that indeed we can name our price. And then lastly, I think even talking to their own employees, at the moment we are all working from home, we desire human contact because we are social beings in bone and marrow. How do they ensure that we are still keeping in touch? Yes, using technology, but just from time to time, somebody checks in on you to say, are you coping? Because with COVID-19, it's not just the work, it's not the output, it's not the results. Emotionally, family, socially, but also psychologically and indeed mentally, are we coping? Thanks, Carol.
Thanks, Professor. I really appreciate those thoughts. And I want to pick up on the point that you made under your 6 summary points when you spoke about a business just surviving is already doing a good job. And I think when businesses are in that survival mode, they often lack the imagination to communicate effectively with their clients. And during the lockdown period, a good example, and maybe a contentious one now that we can't buy alcohol, was during the lockdown period when we couldn't buy alcohol, how few wine producers and others engaged with their clients to understand how they would deliver post the lockdown period. And so for me, I think your point is, let's use this period to look at different strategies to communicate. Ineke and Johan, a question for you guys. When you engage with customers, you often hear what you don't want to hear or what you didn't expect. And then it's very difficult as a business owner, because of course you know best about your products, to pivot and change. So in this world of digital feedback via Twitter and other social media platforms, how trustworthy is the information we're getting from our customers?
What an interesting question. I'd love to know the individual that's asking the question. I think the point is starting to ask the question, starting to say, I want to hear what my consumers are saying. Johan also talked about from the limbic system and how we go into different reactions, different emotions as individuals. Information, that the voice of customer, if we start there, the voice of customer is always important. And as a business, it's about creating that partnership with customers. I think Bonan touched on it in the beginning as well. As we talk about customers, they want it done today, they want it at zero price, or they want it done yesterday and at zero price, and they want it the fastest. It's navigating that uncertainty, and it's navigating that uncertainty with your customers. As a business, we don't always know best. This is really the point earlier around what race are we running, and we're running as business a race around technology that consumers might not be running. So that's the first thing. We might completely be missing the race or where the consumers are. Then when we ask how trustworthy is the information is as trustworthy as you as a business is looking for trustworthy information. There's a lot of information out there. Every day we see businesses doing research, and we want to do research in the moment, and we want to get feedback from consumers. One, we don't do anything with that, or two, we don't take a step back and say, I'm asking my customers to give me feedback. How am I asking, and what am I looking for? So there's a lot of information out there that's not trustworthy, but it's how you do it. You need to understand the basics of customer experience measurement. There's 3 levels. We can get at a brand level, we can get at a strategic and a proprietary level, and then we get in the moment. It's the combination of that information that one needs to bring together, and then the sentiment. So you touched on Twitter and social media. Certainly people rant and rave, and there's a lot of emotions out there. It's truly understanding the sentiment overlaid on that quantitative information that you get back from consumers, that you will absolutely find the nuggets of what your customers are trying to say to you. Information is abound out there. The methodologies are abound. Find the overlay between quantitative and qualitative, because that gives you the intersection of where the customer is trying to really give you the information that you can act on.
Thank you very much. Johan, anything you'd like to add? Just unmute yourself there, Johan. Sorry. There we go.
Thank you. So now I'll gladly just provide maybe a different perspective on this. And again, I like just to tie it back to the customer experience principles that I've earlier mentioned. One of those principles that I've mentioned is that when people interact with a brand, they have expressed needs and unexpressed needs. And I think one of the easiest examples that one can use just to explain what this means in actual practical terms is if you take a credit card as an example. A person would approach a bank and say that I need a credit card. So the expressed need is for a credit card, but what is the unexpressed need? What is behind it? The so-called in order to question. So typically, if you think about it, when a person then obtains access to credit through a credit card, what actually then happens is that the person actually, through that offering, shrinks the distance between himself and a specific dream or aspiration that he may have had. Where I'm going with this is that now more than ever before, keep in mind that people very often, when they use social media and they share things on Twitter and whatever social media platform, to the point that we've made, and Ineke also touched on it, is that people have a tendency to speak and express their opinions, their views, and even their emotions without any real filters, because the filter is actually then the device or the platform that they're using. My view on this is that if you really now look at what is shared via the social media platforms, and you ask yourself, what is behind the question? What is the real need that people are expressing? Then I think that we will be able to get much closer to address the real core needs of the customers out there, the customer universe, so to speak, because that will then enable us to say, if we really want to be customer centric, is really to put yourself in the world of that person and always ask yourself what is behind the question or the comment that is made.
Thank you very much, Johan. I'm going to conclude with a final question with you, Ineke, and then hand over to Professor Bonang to wrap up for us. I'm abusing my privilege as the host here to pick on Professor Bonang to give the closing words. I hope that's all right. But before we do, Ineke, here's a question for you. There's a question that suggests that perhaps we're confusing the adaptation of the fourth industrial revolution. Simply, there were businesses that were better prepared. They were already more efficient. It's got very little to do with the fourth industrial revolution. Or do you think the change is this really advanced IT world of ours?
That's an interesting question. I think there was a couple of businesses that was ready in terms of their digitization, in terms of digital route, and we had the digital pathways. I certainly know of a couple of businesses that have really made great advances in terms of enabling a digitization and a digitization strategy in their businesses. But we all were looking for a disruptor, and we said that digital is going to be the disruptor. And a couple of conferences that I spoke at, and I used to ask this question, I said, so who's going to be the disruptor? And it was always technology. None of us saw this coming. This came out of the peripheral view. So I think the question is whether who was right, who was wrong. The world moved towards 4IR. We want to advance, and I think 4IR is just a terminology. Tomorrow there will be a different terminology. It's about sustainability. It's about adapting to an environment that we might not see the disruptor that comes out of the peripheral view. 4IR is about what everybody saw the technology can do and can enable. And there's certainly different businesses on different stages of the track. Some businesses were more advanced. but internally focused advance. From our experience, and certainly from the examples that I showed, being technology advanced and having that digitization strategy, in general, what we see, it excluded the customer. It excluded truly what the customers need, and Johan spoke to that. We're running a race on technology. And here COVID came and said, stop. Yes, there's nothing wrong with the technologies. There's nothing wrong with your plans. But let me put something into the mix that you've never seen, and whether you are advanced or not, there's still a customer, and a customer that has changed. It might now be a complete spike in your plans. And whether you are advanced as a business or not, the race is not technology. That's just an enabler. It's about where the consumers are and where the psyche of consumers have changed, and where the technology must always be the enabler and not the driver. Trust that answers.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Ineke, Johan, and the Consulta team for those fantastic insights. Everybody who's on the webinar will be receiving a link and some further information from Consulta. And as I said, I'm going to give the last word to the chairman of Consulta, Professor Bonang. And Professor, as part of your wrap up, and again to abuse my position and to put you on the spot, but with somebody as brilliant as you, I know I can. You are always in every environment so well informed, so passionate, optimistic, not in the sense of blindly optimistic, because you're a realist, I think, in many ways. In a world where people are scared, angry, maybe some tips for what we can do to get a bit of the Professor Bonang magic as we face our clients going forward.
Absolutely. I think that's where it brings us to our reason for existence. So as a 21-year-old general consulting company, we really want to thank every single solitary one of the people who found time in their busy schedule to join us, but to work with them to say, how do we help you to review your strategy, not only for relevance and adaptability, its resilience long-term, not just sustainability in the medium term. So that after we have helped you to review that strategy, can we focus on the greatest asset you have, which is your people? Secondly, to look at your structures as to whether you are agile and nimble enough to be able to morph and pivot with the time. Thirdly, what about your systems and processes that you've put in place to allow you to do stuff? And then lastly, there is nothing more important in our job as leaders than what type of culture are we creating? And in that culture, there are just two things as I conclude. One, can we make every single solitary one of our employees to feel needed and wanted? Lastly, to a point where they feel free to speak their mind without any fear of retribution or reprisals. Because if you get that right, then you don't have one CEO, you then have 826 CEOs in the organizations, because they feel that they own this company as much as the shareholders do, and indeed as the CEO does. Currently, you've been absolutely amazing. Ineke, absolutely articulate as always. Johan, very thoughtful, reflective. It's been an absolute joy to have this very relaxed conversation with our people. We're hoping that this is the first of many. Thanks, Carol.
Thank you very much, and we'll make sure that everybody receives the invite to future conversations as you help us connect better with our customers and do a better job as businesses. Thank you very much, Consulta, and have a good day, rest of the day, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.